Driven beautifully down the ground. Stunning off drive.
Okay, the scene, the MCG. The Melbourne Cricket Ground, the famous Melbourne Cricket Ground. But before we go to the MCG, we've got to get a little bit of background as to what's actually going on in this story. You see, my father was a very, very keen sportsman, but he was also, when I was a very young boy, and this story is around 1968, 1969, he was very, very sick too, only a couple of years away from dying. In fact, he died in 1970. But my uncle Bill, he was a crazy, crazy sportsman too. He was actually the president of the Ringwood District Cricket Association, which at that time was the biggest cricket association in the whole world in regards to the numbers of people playing. And my uncle knew that I had never been to the MCG before, and he really wanted to get me interested in cricket. And so he asked my father if he could take me and my dad to the MCG to a cricket test match, Australia versus the West Indies. And of course I was really, really excited. I'd never been to the MCG. I'd never been in a big crowd ever in my whole life. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I did love cricket. I knew that. And Dad was really, really happy with that. And my uncle was a member, so he was able to get us into a really good spot in around the Northern Stand in the members. And so we went off to that game. But before we did, I said to my uncle, not knowing anything, of course, "Are you allowed to take your cricket bat and have a bit of a game?" He goes, yeah, you can do that. Now, you have to understand my uncle. My uncle was a bit of a, what would you say, back in those days, you would have called him a bit of a wag. He would tell you stuff that wasn't necessarily right, but he'd do it all good-natured. But he was very good with practical jokes, and he loved things to happen that maybe were a little bit unusual. And I think he saw an opportunity in me coming. So he said, yeah, of course you can bring your cricket bat. No worries at all. Yeah, no, you can do all that. Anyway, we got to the MCG, and Australia was batting, and we had Bill Lawry, who was the captain at the time, and a guy called Doug Walters, a very, very good cricketer, and the West Indies were in the field. And when it got near lunchtime, I said to my uncle, "Hey, am I allowed to jump over the fence at lunch and go and get all the autographs of all of the players?" He said, "Yeah, of course you can do that. Yeah, no worries at all." What did happen was, at lunchtime, when lunch was called and they all started heading off to the pavilion, I jumped the fence and ran. And I can still hear behind me, I can still hear this crowd laughing. It was a laughing sound. I didn't know what that was about, but I was just running straight towards these players. I caught up to them, and when I caught up to them, I got the autographs of both Bill Lawry and Doug Walters, and I got a couple of the West Indian fielders too. I remember it was Charlie Davis, John Carew, and Lance Gibbs were the three that I remember that I got autographs on my bat. And I thought that was fantastic, but I did look around and go, I wonder why I'm the only person that's doing this. And when I turned around after I'd finished to head back to Uncle Bill and my father, there was a single cop in the middle of the ground, one policeman only, and he was doing this at me. And it was at that point I knew I was in a little bit of trouble. So I ran towards him to the middle of the ground, and by now I can hear the crowd still laughing because they're obviously watching what's going on. But all he did was he just said, "Oh, who did you get the autograph of?" And so I showed him my bat, and he had a look at the autographs, and I ran off the ground, are you ready? With a standing ovation from the Northern Stand and the members. And I can still see the look on my uncle's face. He was in absolute raptures. He was laughing his head off. But the story continued because, you see, when I got home, my mother was there, and I told her that story. And she looked at me and she said, "Okay, I've got a story for you too." And she headed off into all her old photo albums and came back with an amazing photo. You see, when she was a young lady, she was a nurse, and she nursed at a hospital called Prince Henry's. I don't even think it's around anymore. And one day the patients said to her, "Would you jump the fence and take a photo of," you ready for this, Sir Donald Bradman. Now, he was the most famous cricketer in the world at that time. Would have been back in the 40s, I suppose. And so Mum went to the MCG in her nurse's outfit, because that's what the nurses used to do. And apparently on the commentary, when Bradman was on his way to the wicket, they said, "Oh, my goodness, there's a nurse that's jumped over the fence and she's got a camera." And Mum approached Don Bradman, and she said to him, "Excuse me, sir, the patients back in the hospital would really like a photo of you. Would it be okay if I took a photo?" And he said, "Certainly, ma'am." And he stood up there with his bat, and she took a photo with her old Brownie box camera, a really, really old one back in those days. And she went off the ground, and people obviously thought this was just an incredible thing that she'd done. And the next day, there was a cartoon in the paper, and it was just a stick figure picture of a nurse with a Brownie box camera. And I think the thing said, "Bradman smilingly poses for a nurse." She got their photo developed, and she got £30 from Pix magazine, which was a huge amount of money back in those days. And she kept the photo, of course, and we've got copies of it it here. And it's in a frame at my brother Andrew's place. But also in that frame is the cartoon of Mum out on the ground taking the photo. But the other thing that she did a few years after that was she wrote a letter to Bradman and he wrote a letter back. So in the same frame, you've got the photo of Bradman, you've got the cartoon of Mum, and you've also got the letter that Bradman wrote to her. So I thought it was me being courageous, but there was my young mum as a nurse jumping the MCG just like I did. The pressure was put on my son Samuel because, you see, these days you wouldn't have a hope of getting onto the MCG. They would chase you down with about 100 security cars before you even got 10 metres. So it was just good times to be able to do that sort of stuff. That was a lot of fun and certainly brought joy to my father and particularly Uncle Bill.
Gone Bradman, every Aussie dips his lid